Department to access $1 million of earmarked unappropriated balance funds from the 2017-18 budget for implementation of the Los Angeles Regional Initiative for Social Enterprise, LA RISE 3.0 program designed to provide transitional employment and job placement services to individuals experiencing homelessness. This matter is also referred to the Economic Development Committee. Item number 2 is Economic and Workforce Development Department report relative to the LA RISE expansion pilot program, combining rapid rehousing and transitional social enterprise jobs for homeless individuals in the San Fernando Valley and South Los Angeles regions. This matter is also referred to the Economic Development Committee.
Good afternoon, council members. For item 1, Donnie Brooks, EWDD. I'm the LA RISE program manager. We are very excited. We received a total of...
Mr. Herman, I'm going to warn you this one time you've been making noise throughout the meeting, almost nonstop. If it continues, we'll be forced to remove you from the room. Thank you.
We received a total of $5 million for the current program year. There were $3 million in county Measure H funds, another $2 million in general funds, of which $1 million was advanced. We're here today to request the second $1 million in UB funding that was set aside. And to let you know that LA RISE, we're exceeding our performance goals, and we are very excited to continue the momentum that we have currently going. LA RISE is providing primarily transitional paid work opportunity, and it's integrated with our workforce development system. We're forming new partnerships. We have 10 social enterprise intake sites concentrated in downtown LA, South LA, the Valley, and also the West Side. So this second $1 million will allow us to continue the work that we're doing this current year. So we're requesting your support.
Any other from the 2? Questions, comments, members? Mr. Price?
Yeah, this is an exciting development. I'm glad to know that it's moving forward. Can you give us an idea of the kinds of transitional jobs that we're actually placing individuals in?
Yeah, a lot of the jobs are like in the retail sector. There's landscaping, janitorial, entry-level work, and it allows our participants to really develop their soft skills, and it readies them for permanent placement into unsubsidized work opportunities, and that's where the work source system or workforce system comes into play. So we're getting people, these paid work training opportunities that's better preparing them for placement. But a lot of there's also a connection to the city's targeted local hire initiative, and we're referring people for interviews, and I think we have like 5 that have been hired to date, so that's also exciting. Again, LA RISE is really working on the soft skills and creating a lot of opportunity across different sectors.
With those soft skills, then, is there some prep period before they actually are put on the job? Is there some kind of a training, orientation? How does that kind of play out?
Jaime Pacheco Orozco with the Economic and Workforce Development Department. The transitional employment services, the subsidized employment services are occurring through our social enterprise partners. So as the individual Amy Turk commented earlier, Downtown Women's Center is one of our social enterprise partners. What's unique about this particular transitional employment, it is that we place individuals in these social enterprises so that they continue to receive those soft skills and hard skills while they're being case managed. So rather than putting someone into a subsidized employment out in the field without any additional support, we're monitoring and managing their performance and outcomes. When the agency feels that they're appropriately qualified for competitive integrated employment, then we work with the workforce centers to place them in traditional competitive employment. But in that transitional subsidized piece, it really is about ensuring that the individual is stable, both in a housing perspective and then employed and supervised and managed and work through some of those soft skill issues.
Mm-hmm. Could you give us a list of the organizations that we're partnering with in this process? You said there were about 10?
Yeah, there's 10. So Chrysalis, Downtown Women's Center, Los Angeles Conservation Corps, Homeboy Industries, New Earth Life, Center for Employment Opportunities. There's a couple others. There's several others. I don't have the list in front of me, but they're, again, those are the intake sites that are spread throughout the region. And
Did you identify any in South LA? I didn't. There were no names I recall. I mean,
so South LA, we have, so Goodwill has a portal in South LA, and we're going to talk about that on item 2.
Okay.
And they're providing, what's exciting, they're providing placement into their retail stores. And that's, again, that retail sector, which has been exciting, and hiring people permanent, full-time. So LA Rise guarantees 300 hours at minimum wage for every person that signs up, and you start working right away. We do some work readiness prep in the beginning, but everybody starts working right away. And then what's exciting is the partnership allows for those wraparound services and any other barriers that individual must overcome. They're referred to the respective partner to deal with it, but everyone starts working, as soon as they sign up. So
and will the expansion of the program also include an expansion of partners, or just more clients for the number of partners that we have?
Additional clients. So if you notice in the report that with the first allotment of funds, we were at 132% of our 6-month goal. We're actually at 2/3 of the enrollment with the 6-month goal. So our expectation is that we'll exceed our initial expectation. And likewise with the number of subsidized payments, we're 2/3 of our annual goal already. So absolutely, the expansion allows us to continue to serve more individuals. We become much more efficient over time.
Good. Well, keep up the good work. Thanks.
Thank you.
thank you.
Any other questions and comments on this matter, Mr. Bonin?
We're just doing questions on 1 or 1 and 2?
1 and 2.
Okay. So first couple questions on 1. The annual goal for placement in unsubsidized employment is 150, right?
Correct.
And the 6-month goal is 50, and so far we're at 20. Is that current?
Yes.
What have been the biggest challenges in finding unsubsidized employment?
Well, the biggest challenge, so we have, we're recruiting what's called bridge employers that are willing to hire, our targeted population and giving someone a chance who's overcome barriers. So a lot of it is really just that work experience. A lot of our clients who've been homeless have been out of work for a period of time, or they have never worked. So it's building their confidence and giving an employer, a chance to give them employment. And then to also, we've sort of standardized what it means to be an LA Rise graduate. So there's a job readiness assessment that every client undergoes, and our employers have a sense of what skills each person has. So I would say the biggest thing is really just some of the, outside of the bridge employers, just some of the limited number of entry-level opportunities that are available.
Well, what are we doing to work with the LA Area Chamber or the local chambers in our districts to ask them to reach out to their memberships to see if any of them are willing to hire people? I get folks all the time who say, I'd like to do something to help, and if the guy who has a Subway franchise in my district is willing to take someone on, or one of the restaurants on Venice Boulevard or something like that, they're not hearing this. They may have seen something in my newsletter, but is there a vehicle for you to reach out to the LAX area chamber or the West LA chamber and get their members to hear about the opportunity to hire people?
We're available to go out if you have any particular community forums or employer forums, or if you have particular employers that you'd like us to meet with, we're available to go out with our workforce development system. Both Donnie and myself will go out and meet with individual employers. We also work with our contracted service partners in their employer base. So that right now I think that what's really critical to understand is the entry-level jobs are difficult to place individuals in, given that the unemployment rate, although ostensibly is low, for the entry-level jobs, it's still very difficult to get folks in. But if you do have employers, sir, we are available to come out and meet with them. You're welcome to give our direct lines, and we will respond to anybody who has an interest in hiring individuals who have specific barriers to employment.
So there isn't a strategic plan or a concerted effort or strategy to reach out to local chambers and business associations, bids?
We work with the Greater Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce. It's one of our contracted service providers as well. But in terms of a specific outreach in your area, I don't believe that we have one. But we can work with your staff to develop one if it's...
I'm not specifically concerned about my district. Well, I am specifically concerned about my district. I'm not exclusively concerned about my district, is what I'm trying to say. I'd like to see you report back on a strategy to reach out throughout the district, throughout the city, to chambers, to business improvement districts, to places that might be able to get the message out.
Will do.
It's an attractive program, and I think a lot of employers would be interested. I think there'd be enough of an appetite there that you may get 20 or 40 people employed. Second question is, LA Rise a potential source of employment for the attendants that we're going to need to hire for the mobile bathrooms for Pit Stop that we approved before the holidays?
Yes, so it's staffed with LA Rise participants, so they're getting that paid work experience through the Goodwill contracted provider. So that's referring to the hygiene center, right?
Well, we also approved pilot programs in 3 or 4 different parts of the city with mobile bathrooms based on the San Francisco model. Each of those need to have attendance at least 12 hours a day.
Correct. So LA Rise participants are getting, work experience at those mobile sites.
Okay, these are ones that haven't come online yet.
So these are the ones that are getting the subsidized 300 hours of paid work experience, so that's guaranteed. And once they exhaust the 300 hours, then we look at getting them hired permanently with the contractor or transition them to another employer in the region.
If I understand your question, sir, we will target the LA Rise participants for those mobile units that are coming on board to ensure that they're considered for those positions.
Thank you. Then I'll skip item 2 then and ask a question about the combining rapid rehousing and the program. I think that's a great idea that Mr. Krikorian and Harris Dawson have had, because if you're in rapid rehousing, it's a temporary subsidy. You're going to need a job to make it sustainable. So it's a great marriage there. I understand that there's been problems in finding units.
Correct.
This isn't so much a question for economic and workforce development. I guess it's a question more for LASA. Or perhaps Meg might have some insight into the county has been very successful with its master leasing program through Housing for Health. OPCC, or now the People Concerned, has its own sort of mini version of master leasing program. Have we looked at or considered doing a master leasing program so that LASA or HSID or someone is the master landlord for 200 units around the city, and then when we have someone, we can roll them right in and cut out the middleman for the landlord?
So we're looking in, Paul Duncan with LASA. We're looking into that right now and getting technical assistance from our national TA provider to look at other models, and has anybody done a master lease with rapid rehousing? There are some specific challenges to that of how long are they the person that holds that master lease, as rapid rehousing is not a long-term intervention such as the flexible housing subsidy pool. So there are some factors that need to be taken into account as far as, do we fund that as an activity where we're paying the agency as a landlord going forward, because they will have ongoing obligation to that person that they've exited from the rapid rehousing program. But we are looking at different options and alternatives that we could implement that, and it's something that we strongly feel that needs to be implemented with the current housing market, or we're going to continue to face challenges and and difficulties with outcomes.
Fair point about the difference between the rapid rehousing and the PSH. That's a very good point. When do you expect you'll have more on that to share with us?
I would say we are working to move as quickly as possible, so within the next 2 to 3 months we should have something more solidly to show as far as a proposal as a model for a leasing program attached to, master leasing program attached to rapid rehousing.
All right. Two sounds better than 3.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bonin. We've been joined by a council member from the 14th District, Mr. Jose Huizar, and the council member from the 7th District, Ms. Monica Rodriguez. A full complement of members of the committee. I'd add, if there's nothing from Ms. Rodriguez or Mr. Huizar, to Mr. Bonin's line of questioning about jobs. So the city does a lot of contracting with a lot of small businesses. I'm wondering if you all have a specific strategy to engage with those contractors, who oftentimes are getting contracted to clean up the streets that people were living on.
I'm going to have to answer, I don't know at this point, but I can check back with the department. I know that we have worked with a number of agencies that do provide those cleaning services, Chrysalis being one of those.
Sure.
Where we contract with them, and they are a service provider in this program for the social enterprises. But I can report back to your office.
Thank you. So if I'll add that, should Mr. Bonin be okay with it,
Yeah.
in addition to looking at business organizations, we look at the city's contracting as opportunities for unsubsidized work that we know is going to happen. So if there's no objection, we will concur with these items on consent. Hearing none, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Make sure there's no comment cards on that. Yeah. I think we'll go from here to item number 5.
Would you like me to read that into the record, sir?
Yes, we're going to read into the record, and if you all can leave a seat for our public comment. We have one public commenter, so yes, sir.
Item number 5 is the Housing and Community Investment Department to report relative to the Proposition HHH Permanent Supportive Housing Loan Program regulations based on the November 2nd, 2017 report from the Housing and Community Investment Department.
Thank you so much. We have one public comment card on this item. Ms. Valerie Acevedo.
Good afternoon. My name is Valerie, and I am here representing the Southern California Association of Nonprofit Housing. It's a coalition of over 250 nonprofit housing developers and supporters in the region. SCAMP supports LA's permanent supportive housing ordinance because it will increase siting and help streamline new PSH developments. We understand that there have been many obstacles to construction, such as CEQA and community opposition. Fortunately, the ordinance cuts red tape while still representing neighborhood character and saves taxpayers millions of dollars. It's critical we deliver on the promises of Proposition HHH and vote yes on this ordinance. Thank you.
So you have one additional card on item number 5. Sanea Smith from Hopix. Had a big celebration this morning.
Hi, my name is Sanea Smith. I'm the SPA 6 Regional Coordinator for the Coordinated Interest System for Families, and I am here on behalf of Hopix SSG, and we are in support of the model conversation and the PSH ordinance. This legislation is very critical to reducing the barriers and to develop affordable housing for the individuals and families in the SPA 6, and to deliver on the promises of Prop HHH, which stand solidarity with the other community-based organizations that are represented here today, that these are efficient and timely solutions to the complex problem for the homelessness in LA County. That's it.
Thank you. I appreciate you. We're not required to use all the time, so. Excellent. Excellent. So this item is on the regulations for the HHH Loan Fund Program. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Harris Dawson and members of the committee. My name is Sean Spear. I'm the Assistant General Manager for Housing Development with the Housing Department. I'm joined by Tim Elliott, who is our Housing Trust Fund Manager. We wanted to take this opportunity to report back to you on a couple of the items that were included in the motion that approved the HHH regulations back on December 12th. In part, we see this as kind of an opportunity to discuss some of the items that we are looking to take back to the stakeholders as part of a discussion that would lead to potential changes to the HHH regulations for the next fiscal year. I think it would also be sort of an opportunity for us to get both feedback and potentially ideas from you all in terms of what you would want us to take to the stakeholders for discussion and possible changes as well. So basically what we're going to do is take a couple minutes to walk through what were some of the ideas delineated in the committee's motion that went to council. It just so happens that they were actually items that we had heard back from some of the stakeholders on, and what we were already in effect preparing to take to the stakeholders again as part of the new review process. And then I think, we would sort of be happy to answer any questions or thoughts you may have and perhaps have an open discussion about some new opportunities that you all may think we should include. So I'm going to turn it over to Tim, who can walk us through the motion's actions.
So there was several items that were listed in the report back, and these included shared housing, smaller projects, less than 25 units, incentives for private funding, campus-type projects, and other innovative approaches. So, there was some subsequent council action after this committee adopted the regulations that lowered the minimum unit size to 20 units. And in fact, we've gotten an application for a project as small as 5 units in this last funding round. And the health department has told us that they could provide services on a scattered site basis to smaller projects. So it is feasible to do those if the funding was in place. And one of the things that we said was that for projects that aren't feasible to sell tax credits on, that we would still be able to fund those as long as they were otherwise fully funded. We wouldn't want to take the place of that private equity, but if that could be raised from some other source, then those are feasible projects. Shared housing is a thing that we've heard some discussion about, and in talking with the CAO, that's an eligible item under the facilities program, and would it might be a better place for that funding, and there is money available, but not under the permanent supportive housing program, but it certainly is bridge housing that would fill a need. And there is HHH money available for facilities. There's another asked for a discussion about private funding and incentives for private funding of projects. And supportive housing traditionally has had little or no private debt because the developers want to take the cash flow from the Section 8 or the flexible subsidy pool, and they needed to pay for those for services. And we had, in fact, allowed people to take up to $4,000 per unit per year to pay for case management. Well, now with the adoption of the Measure H program, the County Health Services will provide intensive case management services through those dollars, and there may be an opportunity to increase private debt on these projects. But that's something that we would really need to talk to the stakeholders, including the investors, about, because that would be a big change in the way the industry does business. And for every private dollar that you borrow, you have to have reserves in a supportive housing project in case the operating subsidy goes away. So it may not be a dollar for dollar benefit to the project. And so this is something that we'd have to carefully talk to the whole development community about before we make any kind of recommendations. But we do think there's opportunity there. And then we were asked about campus-style projects, and we'd heard from from members of your committee and from other stakeholders, the Housing Authority and so forth, and there is some thought that our restrictions that you have at least 20 units in each building or half the units in a project, be supportive housing, may be unduly restrictive for large multifamily, multi-phase developments. And we've received applications for projects on the VA campus in West LA, and Bond Council has opined that even though that's in the county, that would be an eligible use of funds. And we've talked to the health services themselves about hospital campuses, closed hospitals that are ripe for redevelopment. So there are maybe those kinds of projects that would deserve some special treatment in the future. And then we were asked about other innovative approaches, and you know, as we just heard from the commenter, that the supportive housing ordinance would be a kind of a game changer, because right now there's still you know, parking you know, required, even if it's a supportive housing project, and if it's in a case of a tiny home or something like that, you'd probably require 2 parking spaces. So our understanding is that the supportive housing ordinance would address this, and that may make projects that don't have to be built over a podium, say with shipping containers or something, a lot more feasible. So we're carefully tracking that, and you know, we'll address that in the future because we're hearing, and the county's also directed, the County Board of Supervisors has also directed their staff to report back on those issues, and there are ongoing meetings about innovation that are happening with mental health. So and we were asked for a schedule as to how we were going to engage the stakeholders. So we want to start this process right away, and we're planning on having another round of HHH funding in February, and would be having a bidders conference, and that may be a good opportunity to get feedback from the stakeholders, and then the idea is that we would draft regulations, these revised regulations for public comments in March, and present them to the oversight committees in April, and bring them back to you in May, and council in June, and be ready to issue the first call for the 2018-19 fiscal year in July. So the last thing was how to ensure that the council made in its amending motion to the regulations. It was how do we ensure participation from more qualified developers? And one of the things that we were particularly concerned about when we rolled out the program was that we get experienced people that could provide supportive housing. So. But and so we had said that the lead developer had to have experience in doing, say, 2 projects for special needs with housing that had been open for a year, and you know, some of the for-profit developers who could potentially be more cost-effective had said that was a barrier to their participation.
I'm sorry, because why?
Well, because they hadn't, they're market rate developers or just family developers.
Right, and it's clear, like, it's not could be a barrier, that would be a barrier. That's the point of the regulation, right? Well, to be a barrier to them.
Well, either that or there would be partnerships. And
where someone else is the lead.
Well, or they would bring in a sponsor But since the MOU with county got signed, with the Measure H funds became available, that the identity of the service provider is kind of less of a concern of ours, because we know that the county is going to provide intensive case management services on a kind of whatever is needed basis. So we think that we could probably modify that requirement, and it might, so that a sort of a fee builder could come in and know that we would have good service provision, and that might bring in folks that we haven't seen, because the folks that we saw in this last round were pretty much the usual suspects that had been planning deals kind of all along.
So we think in part with the redefinition of that threshold requirement that we could be able to encourage some of the other developers who have experience building housing and being able to do it on a fee development basis. I just wanted to, before we close our comments, I just wanted to emphasize that I think we see this that as part of HHH, as similar to our managed pipeline process. We anticipate this really being an annual discussion that we would have with stakeholders and potentially with you all as well, leading into the changes to the regulations. The kind of third piece that informs any changes to the regulations is actually our experience with the projects as they come in. That we recognize sort of best practices, recognize other lessons learned as part of the review and approval of those. So we think together with the information from the stakeholders, from the projects that we receive, as well as your input, we think we can come up with a really great list for the groups to consider that would ultimately make the regulations much more in tune with the opportunities that we can have in developing supportive housing. That concludes our comments.
Thank you all. Questions and comments, members? I'm sure there are a lot. I'll start to my left. Mr. Rodriguez, Mr. Price, Mr. Bonin.
Sean's picking up Jacob today, so I got a lot today.
Boy.
Just a quick thing. I was glad to hear you report what I had heard through the grapevine about council advising that the VA projects would be eligible. This is an island that is completely surrounded by the city of Los Angeles, and it's a place where we can get PSH built probably more quickly than we can anywhere else in the city of Los Angeles. Because even when we pass the PSH ordinance, it can be done more quickly there, because you're not dealing with all the local land use stuff. The EIR for stuff has been done at the federal level. They're waiting. They've got 3 buildings that they want to house people in. So it could be done really quickly, and particularly given the mayor's commitment to addressing veterans' homelessness. So I'm glad to see that in there. You talked a lot about stuff that we all had an interest in, about the innovative and the creative stuff. And you said, yeah, okay, this is good. Potentially good. What's the next step to not just saying at this stage of the game, yeah, okay, this is something we'll consider, but making sure that the folks out there who are interested in this stuff know that these are eligible projects. The standard PSH approach, there's a pipeline out there. They know how to do this. Some of the others might not. How do we get the word out?
Yeah, so it really is kind of a combination of efforts, and really, beyond us as well. I mean, I think we do our part to engage folks in the industry, engage others that may not have traditionally done work with us in the past, to really suggest to them that there is this opportunity to look at very creative ways to address the need. So one step that we did just right off the bat with the last call for projects was to include in the notification that it was being publicized was that we are encouraging projects that are both innovative and physical as well as financial approaches. Beyond that, though, we regularly are having meetings and engagements with architects, with others that are coming up with ideas, and they do reach out to us, and we try and reinforce to them the opportunity to do these. A lot of it is that, frankly, the step that they have to then take is to find a site, to find a developer who's willing to hire them to bring them in to do the work. So we try to, as much as possible, provide them with the list of developers that we know out there that they might be able to engage with. And I think at the end of the day, this initial set of deals were ones that were already fairly well into the works, but I think over the next couple of calls for projects, we'll start to see many more creative designs and projects coming forward.
I just want to ask about outreach to two different potential groups of folks who might be thinking about stuff but aren't sort of in the immediate family of hearing about stuff. Mm-hmm. One is Mr. Harris-Dawson has convened at least once, I think a couple times, representatives of people from the neighborhood councils who are working on homelessness. Mm-hmm. Are we doing any outreach or engagement to them to let them know what's going on here? Because they often hear, at more of a grassroots, non-bureaucratic level, different ideas and approaches.
Mm-hmm. As part of our budget process each year, we actually have an engagement meeting with some of the neighborhood councils to discuss our projects as well as, our budget as well as our programs. At the last ones that we had this past fall, I made it a point of explaining to them the opportunities we think we have with HHH and seeing that in part if they know of projects that folks are discussing or are brought forward to them, that we're happy to sort of help and engage and inform the council as needed if they move forward with those projects.
So you'll be doing outreach to them in the next couple of months?
We can do so again. We have stakeholders that are part from the community as well as advocates as well, and we would want to make sure that the word gets out with them as too.
And the second pool of folks I'd be interested in reaching out to are the homeless service providers or other nonprofits, for that matter, that don't currently do housing, but may be hearing about ideas. And the reason I suggest that is 3 or 4 years ago, OPCC was not a housing provider. Mm-hmm. They're not a developer, but they're now a housing provider through the master leasing. Mm-hmm. So there are universes of people out there who have suggestions that just don't know how to plug into the pipeline. And they might not be things that are eligible for the next cycle, but they might be the thing we're doing 3 cycles from now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've heard quite a bit of feedback on that end. Both in part, we are collaborating with the county in terms of folks that may traditionally have contracts with them and providing services and making sure they're aware of the opportunities on the housing side as well. What we've also heard is there are sort of non-traditional providers that nevertheless through their own fundraising have been providing services for many years. There are folks like Jackie DuPont Walker from Ward EDC comes to mind, who's trying to pull together a group that is focused on being able to educate them and provide technical assistance, which would ultimately lead to them potentially coming in with new projects under this program.
Thank you.
Mr. Mizar? Excellent. We thank you all so much for responding to the questions and contradictions pointed out by committee members and the council. I think what you all have presented today speaks to all the main issues certainly that I had and that I remember members putting forward in the committee. So we thank you for your report, and if there's no objection or further comment, we'll accept your report.
Thank you.
We'll read item number 3 into the record.
Item number 3 is negative declaration, categorical exemption under California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA guidelines, section 5301, and related CEQA findings, report from the Los Angeles City Planning Commission, and proposed ordinance relative to amending sections 12.03, 14.00, and 151.02 of the Los Angeles Municipal Code to establish regulations to facilitate the use of existing hotels and motels for supportive housing and/or transitional housing, This matter is also referred to the Planning and Land Use Management Committee.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We have 4 public comment cards on this matter, and then we'll ask staff to come forward. We have Olivia Lee, Armando Flores, Linda Jones, and Marie Ramsey. You have 1 minute each. Any order, go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Armando Flores with the Valley Industry and Commerce Association, VICA. We commend the work the city is doing to help address the housing crisis that continues to impact many Angelenos across the region. There are thousands of individuals experiencing homelessness, and this ordinance will present an opportunity to utilize existing structures to respond to the immediate housing needs. It promotes creative, cost-effective strategies to expand housing solutions for individuals experiencing homelessness. These buildings are structurally similar to residential buildings and have the potential to be quickly adapted to provide interim housing through publicly funded programs. This is a step in the right direction to begin housing individuals experiencing homelessness, but we also want to ensure that this does not establish a baseline for affordable units. We urge you to support this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Olivia Lee, representing the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce here in support for this ordinance. This ordinance is an example of creative and cost-effective strategies from city planning to combat our homelessness crisis here in Los Angeles. Specifically, this will allow us to utilize existing structures that are structurally similar to residential buildings like motels and have them quickly adapted to provide interim housing while we are building homes. If passed, these projects will be allowed to be used for supportive or transitional housing. As long as the contract to provide these types of housing is maintained, it will make it significantly easier for eligible projects to make minor physical alterations to the space. For example, adding kitchenettes to units or converting space to better provide supportive services. With that, we urge you to support this ordinance today. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Sorry. Okay.
Oh, you're here. I'm sorry, Ms. Ramsey.
Hi, my name is Marie Rumsey, and I'm here on behalf of CCA. We strongly support the interim motel conversion ordinance and believe it builds on the success of the adaptive reuse ordinance. The adaptive reuse ordinance worked because it did not require any new parking. Residential projects were allowed to proceed utilizing the existing parking on site. This is what is proposed in the IMC ordinance, and it must be preserved to make this program successful. If approved as presented, this ordinance has the potential to bring on a significant amount of new units online quickly. Thank you for your consideration, and thank you to the City Attorney's Office for their work on this.
Excellent, thank you. I had 4 cards, and I heard 3 speakers. Going once, twice. That's the end of that. Okay. Oh, is it you?
Are you going to have general comments?
At the very end of the meeting, I have a person named Ms. McCarthy. At the end of the meeting? That's it, though. That's all I have. Wait. Did I call your name?
Yeah, Linda Jones.
Okay, well then, you have to speak.
Thank you for allowing us all to speak today. Hotels and motels would be an excellent solution for temporary homelessness and should be enacted immediately. However, the number of people that live, sleep, and walk the streets every day in LA and every night is at 30,000. This is a humanitarian health crisis beyond belief. And this crisis is why our citizens have approved measures H and HHH into law. The citizens trusted that you would act forcefully and swiftly to make huge improvements. The citizens have allocated you with $1.3 billion to solve this crisis, and the County of Los Angeles with another $2.3 billion. Thus far, your results are very poor. We don't want to hear that you have found new housing for 4 homeless families in Reseda.
Thank you. That's your time.
Okay.
I appreciate you.
You can submit the rest of it for the record, and everybody will get a copy if you want, Linda.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bonnet. Yes.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Marquise Harris-Dawson and council members. My name is Capri Maddox, Special Assistant City Attorney. I'm here today to discuss motel conversion program. We don't need to belabor the magnitude of the homeless crisis here in Los Angeles of nearly 50,000 people. We are here to present a unique opportunity to use the existing housing stock and buildings to create an opportunity for a rapid housing option. These can be used for permanent supportive housing or interim housing with intensive case management services. City Attorney's Office would like to thank the partners from Building and Safety, Fire Department, Housing, our Housing Department, CAO's office, the Mayor's office, particularly Deputy Mayor Shockley, and other city staff. After over 24 meetings and a partnership with the Association of the Apartment-Owned Association of Greater Los Angeles, we've had an opportunity to craft a program that I think will meet the needs of the residents in crisis and move this issue forward to house individuals. I'd like to give special thanks to the Planning Department as well as the Housing Department. Our Planning Department was always at the table and always solution-oriented, and I can't thank them enough for their leadership. You will hear from them today as well. The opportunity actually came to us from the Apartment-Owned Association of Greater Los Angeles, where Joe Patel, the immediate past president of the Association of Greater Los Angeles, Greater Los Angeles apartment owners had over 75 motel owners with access to thousands of housing units attend an information meeting in April of last year. Councilman Marquise Harris-Dawson, you were present, and you motivated many motel owners to participate in the Housing for Health program that's going to be funded with Measure H funding. The City Attorney's Office wanted me to convey special thanks to you and your staff because we now have overwhelming interest from motel owners. Motels, as we all know, are often underutilized and available for short or long-term housing options. The motel conversion program is not a panacea, but merely a mechanism to create rapid housing options with our intensive case management. To date, we have a couple of hundred units that may be a couple hundred units that may be in play to be used for this program, but maybe it could be up to a couple thousand depending on how quickly we move, because some of our motel owners are getting a little anxious and don't know if this program is going to go forward. Some of the features that they particularly like about the draft is, steady income, master lease format while retaining ownership, and they will only be responsible for major repairs, such as roofs, et cetera. And the motel owners are also interested in being a part of the solution. The properties will be used for services and housing. And the other thing that really was enticing for the motel owners is the ability to revert back to motel use at the end of the contract period, which is a maximum period of 15 years. And again, this program will be run by Brilliant Corners, which has been selected by the county to administer the Housing for Health as well as Measure H funding. The owners are interested now. They're eager to participate in the program, and obviously we all need a solution. And because of the need is urgent, we encourage you to request the City Attorney's Office to draft and transmit the ordinance within 30 days for City Council consideration. We will now turn it over to our esteemed colleagues at the Planning Department, and I think the next voice you'll hear will be from Callie Harding. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Capri, and good afternoon, council members. My name is Callie Hardy with the Department of City Planning. If it's all right, I have about a 5-minute presentation on some of the details of the proposed ordinance. So the ordinance was drafted in large response to some of the issues that Capri mentioned, as well as Strategy 7C in the Comprehensive Homeless Strategy, which was adopted by the City Council in February, I think, 2016. And so that strategy directed the department to look at ways to facilitate adaptive reuse of existing sort of higher density residential structures within the city, such as hotels and motels, as really an opportunity to provide supportive housing and transitional housing at kind of a more cost-effective and kind of quickly attained kind of solution. And as we've seen with the passage of Measure H, there's now becoming increasing funding available at the county level to help support these types of efforts. Capri provided some background, but kind of based on some of the examples of the motel conversion projects that we've seen already in the city, we're anticipating that most motel conversions that would take place under this ordinance would involve a partnership arrangement between the property owner, a nonprofit supportive housing provider, and a local public agency such as the Housing for Health program with the county, where you would see a contract basically between that nonprofit agency and the county agency, and a master lease agreement with the motel owner. And so that nonprofit entity would be providing much of the property management, would be ensuring that the supportive services are provided. Just kind of as some background in terms of the efforts that the planning department has been working on with this draft ordinance, we released the draft for public comment and public review earlier this fall in September 2017. And so during that public review period, we held a series of 5 informational sort of open house events throughout the city in tandem with our permanent supportive housing ordinance, which will be discussed in item 4. And we also held 2 staff public hearings during that time to sort of gain additional feedback from members of the public. So the proposed ordinance, as drafted, is really intended to address some of the potential barriers that may arise when you're looking at a motel that might be converting to supportive housing or transitional housing. Some of those issues might arise due to the fact that the project needs to conform to building codes and the underlying sort of zoning requirements when it's looking at this change of use. And oftentimes we might see in the city that many of these hotels or motels are older structures, and so they may not necessarily be conforming with the current zoning regulations, and especially regarding things like your use, your parking requirements, and the density requirements. And so there's also been some questions about how motel conversions would relate to the city's rent stabilization ordinance and sort of other city codes as well. So that's what this ordinance is kind of intending to address. And so the ordinance would create a new ministerial public benefit process for qualifying projects. Through this process, regardless of the underlying zoning, a qualified project would be allowed to be used for this supportive housing or transitional housing use. So any existing buildings that are not in conformance with the current zoning regulations, again including your parking, density, and use regulations, would be allowed to be used for this purpose without needing additional planning entitlements. And then once that contract to provide the supportive housing or transitional housing use expires, the buildings would be required to revert back to their previous legal use or any use allowed by the current zoning. In order to qualify for the program, projects would need to be a legally existing hotel, motel, or some other sort of transient residential structure. And all units in the building must be converted to either supportive housing or transitional housing, so you cannot be operating the motel use concurrent with the supportive housing. The project would also be required to demonstrate that that contract is in place to provide supportive housing and transitional housing, as well as the associated supportive services and rental assistance that goes along with that. And that contract, as I've alluded to, must be with a local public agency such as the County Department of Health Services. And then kind of based on some of the feedback that we've gotten throughout our process and in recognition of sort of the critical importance of providing on-site supportive services, projects will also be required to provide some dedicated case management service area on-site at a minimum ratio of basically 1 case management office for every 20 units. Projects would also be allowed to make some minor physical alterations to the interior of the existing structure, for example, by adding kitchenettes to the individual units or converting some floor area to supportive services or case management space. And the one kind of key thing to note is that those alterations cannot result in additional units or expansion of the building footprint or additional building height. And then lastly, before I just conclude and open up to questions, is just wanted to point out that the ordinance also kind of clarifies how the residential hotel and rent stabilization ordinance provisions apply to these projects, but is not substantively changing existing city policy.
Questions, comments, members? Others? Mr. Weezar?
Great. Well, thank you, Chair Harris-Dawson, for hearing this update. It's a much necessary move as we implement our comprehensive strategic plan, and I think this was an item in that we have moved upon, and I want to thank the City Attorney's Office for also being so active in it and unwinding sometimes what could be some heavy bureaucracy to get some good work done. And the Planning Department, the CPC, has also shown a lot of leadership. Adaptive reuse of any buildings that we have is very important, whether it's vacant parcels for the city or some older buildings in the city, which we have yet to tackle. But moving forward and allowing people who are willing to provide their motels for homeless is a great example of what's possible. They're currently used by people or families experiencing homelessness when they get a voucher. So I know we went through a lot of explanation right now, and the voucher is usually for short-term housing. So how is this different from that proposal? How is this proposal different from just giving someone a voucher right now, so that we're very clear on that?
So when the vouchers are actually given at this time, the HACLA vouchers are primarily for the room rental, and it does not include a opportunity for intensive case management. So a lot of times when people are looking for ways to not be homeless, we deal with people that have mental illness. You also have individuals that may have drug addiction issues. And so when you have intensive case management with this model, it is such a better option. And also, I think we should bring up that we will have a building full of people that are actually under case management, which would be intensive case management. Yeah. So a lot of times if you just put someone into a structure that may be filled with problems or temptations, they may not be able to end the cycle of homelessness as easily. And I think Meg Barkley from the CAO's office just came to the table.
We've been joined by our homelessness czar, Ms. Meg Barkley. Welcome.
Hi, this is Meg Barkley, City Homeless Coordinator based in the CAO's office. I think the other thing it's important to recognize about this too is that when a voucher is issued, that requires a rental unit, a more traditional rental unit that would meet specific inspection standards set by HUD. The thing that's great about this proposal is that this can expand the supply of permanent supportive housing much more quickly without a city's subsidy. The standards that are set for the master leases, they're set by the Housing for Health program and the Brilliant Corners, the master leasing agent. And the rehab should be much less extensive, and also it doesn't require the landlords to sign a 55-year covenant on the use of the property. Just the requirement is for the term of the master lease, which would make this more attractive to owners of these buildings to be able to convert, and we have seen some interest from landlords that have been presented with this option.
Ms. Barkley.
Motel owners, excuse me.
Yeah, and Ms. Barkley, you're in charge of implementing the comprehensive strategic plan. How does this fit into the overall strategic plan that we're doing and where we are in implementing it? One of our first actions was HHH. Then we're in parallel with identifying city-owned parcels and motels, and we also have another item coming up to expedite permanent supportive housing. So how does this fit into the overall comprehensive strategic plan, and do you think are we missing pieces, and how does this piece fit in?
Oh, this fits in largely to the housing, like some of the housing strategy 7C, adaptive reuse, the House LA 7Q, and some of the planning requirement or the planning strategies as well. I think the important thing that we've been seeing and how this fits really nicely into sort of the trajectory that we're on around establishing an inventory and an infrastructure for developing permanent supportive housing is that those hard units that we are building with Proposition HHH take time to be entitled. Hopefully less time based on the next item that you'll hear soon. But they take time to be entitled, they take time to get all the other financing in place and time to just construct. These units could come online much more quickly with less extensive rehab requirements. So filling that gap, getting more units online sooner while the permanent stock is being constructed with Proposition HHH.
Now, we say this is for supportive housing or transitional housing, but if we use the federal definition of transitional housing, I think HUD is moving away from that. And I just want to make sure that we're also can use these for bridge housing and recuperative care housing. Is that possible here, or do we need to expand that? How are we with that?
That's the other thing that's great about this is HUD is not funding operating for transitional housing anymore. But and the Housing for Health and the Intensive Case Management Services program can be a gap for people, can be a transitional situation for people once they get stabilized. They may not stay in these units, and they're much more flexible because it's local money, and it's not. And so they could go for programs that have a more limited term on the stay and because there's an operating source out of the county this way. It's really an untapped resource of units that hopefully we'll be able to access.
My final question is this, and it's more as it pertains to your jurisdictions and responsibilities. This is somewhat of a planning issue, and part of the vision we had for your role was to be able to convene different departments, come across different departments, have the holistic view of how we're addressing homelessness, which is something the city never had. Are departments responding to your ability to call meetings together, have them cooperate, and have them give you the time and resources that we need to be able to implement some of these policies?
Yes, absolutely, especially through the items we've been able to hear in the Homeless Strategy Committee. This item particularly and the Permanent Supportive Housing Ordinance have been heard by the Homeless Strategy Committee a couple of times and received feedback before they were issued, as far as because they do address a number of the strategies in the Comprehensive Homeless Strategy in addition to the two that I just stated. Also, the reform of the site plan review, micro units, things like that are in the housing strategies. This crosses over a number of those strategies, and having that kind of broader lens has helped, I think, get us to where we are today.
Thank you.
Sure.
So, Mr. Bonin?
No questions. Just want to say on this and both the motel and the PSH ordinance, amen. Long overdue. I am so glad we are doing these. My neighbor, Linda Jones, is here from Mar Vista today. She is incredibly impatient about solutions to homelessness. She's a rare voice on Nextdoor saying, do something, bring services and housing to the area. And that impatience is what demands this kind of stuff, so that the solutions can come faster, can come quicker. This can't happen fast enough. So thank you for bringing both of these forward today. We need them desperately.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Bonin. Ms. Rodriguez?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to echo my colleagues and thanking you for helping to bring this forward. I know there was a lot of effort and time put into this, but I do have an amendment that I'd like to propose, and that is that I'd move to that the motel conversion ordinance subsection B, application and approval, be amended to include the following requirement, and that project applications require the submission of a property management plan to HCID, and the property management plan must be approved by HCID prior to the lease being up. And that's my only recommended change, but I again wanted to thank you for all of your work on this.
It was a team effort.
Thank you. Mr. Price?
Thank you. And again, thanks for this collaborative effort. I know we've been working on this intensely for the past several months, and we just appreciate your efforts in bringing this forward. Just a couple of general questions. This interim period we're talking about is 15 years. Is that like the standard, or did I hear that incorrectly someplace?
Yes, the leases, the master leases will be for 3 to 5 years, and with a maximum time period of 15 years for the motel conversion.
Mm-hmm. And could you give us some idea of what these rental amounts are going to be, what the voucher amounts are going to be for the motel owners?
The per door cost will range from $750 per month to $1,050 per month, depending on the condition of the motels.
And I presume they don't all have kitchens, but some do. Do they get the higher amounts?
Yes, and The units that actually have space for kitchenettes may have kitchenettes actually installed in those units. And we're working closely with the fire department on some of the regulations related to fire life safety concerns.
And will it be installed at the expense of the owner or the program, or the owner gets reimbursed, or how's that conversion going to take place?
Brilliant Corners will work on a contract and an agreement based on the condition and size of the available properties, and the negotiations will allow for a variety of options. If the motel owner would like to invest in the property and make all of the updates and upgrades necessary, they will get a higher per month dollar value. If they say take the building as is, then they would probably be on the lower end of the spectrum for monthly rental payments, and Brilliant Corners would actually do the construction and upgrades.
And are supportive services going to be provided on site? Is that a requirement that there be some?
They will be
one of the units be used as a
for most units. However, we may have some buildings that have just a few units. I think we have a minimum of 10 to 12 units. If it's under a certain amount of units, we may not have someone on site. But in the Brilliant Corners, it's run these operations all over the county, and they have a really great reputation. In some instances, they may have a number of buildings in a close proximity within like a mile, and they may house an individual to stay at one of those units off-site, but it would be nearby, and we would have still intensive case management for those individuals. And of course, they will use discretion on which housing candidates they place in units. If someone is struggling and is actually new to being housed, of course, those folks will have an opportunity for intensive case management on site.
I do want to clarify that as drafted, the ordinance is requiring at least one case management office be provided in all properties, even though the ratio is 1 per 20. If there are fewer than 20 units, they still would have that requirement.
That was the number, 20.
And that office is open a couple hours a day, all day, 24 hours a day, and what's the...
The idea is that it's a physical site and a physical space for the case managers to have sort of private one-on-one meetings with the clients that live in the building.
I mean, it's envisioned, though, that these would just be available during business hours, or, I mean, are they going to be available as needed? I mean, what's the...
Yeah, I
I'm
believe...
just trying to physically get an idea of, we got these folks in the motel, they got an issue, and they got to wait till the morning before someone comes into the office to get some help or
So the way that I understand that it works is the case manager may not necessarily always have open office hours, but they would be reachable via cell phone, and they could come and assist as needed.
Okay, good. And when do we anticipate that the program's going to actually start? I mean, we're going to actually get some people into beds or in the rooms, or...
I'm glad you asked, Councilmember. As soon as these units are, as soon as these matters are approved by full City Council, we can move forward. Brilliant Corners has already been in discussions with motel owners. They've even had site visits for some of these locations, and so it's a matter of working out a contract. They have not moved forward, but we anticipate within 60 days of council approval, we will probably have our initial units online.
And do you anticipate these units sort of being scattered around the city, or are they all going to be concentrated in one or two council districts?
And I definitely understand your concerns, council member. As we know, we have locations all over the city where we have motels. So it is a matter of those individual motel owners contacting Brilliant Corners to inquire about the program. So we are not, targeting one or two council areas for this program. This is a citywide program, sir.
Okay, but you can give us a list or a map of where these initial locations are going to be, just so we can start tracking it.
And some of these locations may not, and some of these motel owners at these locations may not actually enter a contract. They did have an inspection from Brilliant Corners, but perhaps Brilliant Corners may not wish to enter an agreement with the motel owner or vice versa.
Okay. All right. Well, again, thanks for your efforts. Did you have a comment?
I was just going to add, as part of our research, we had assembled a list of all the motels within the city, and so we have a list of, based on the assessor data, just kind of where every single motel is located. If that's something that's of interest, we could certainly provide that.
Good. And I know many of these motels, some are been bad actors. They're on the list to close or to be whatever. Was there any priority to focusing on those, or just as they came up, or is that part of our strategy?
The city attorney's office at times handles, nuisance abatements. However, our office is not going to be involved in the selection process, and I don't believe at this time we've made allowances for any priorities. It's pretty much a first come, first serve model, but as a former neighborhood prosecutor, I would hope that some of those motel owners that are struggling would like to participate in the program.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much, Mr. Price, and thank you all for bringing forward this program. It's one of the most important elements of our plan, especially given that the voters not once but twice have opened up their pocketbooks to address the issue of homelessness and don't see a real dramatic material impact. This is one of the programs that we have that I actually believe can make a qualitative impact on neighborhoods in two ways. One, in pulling people that are on the streets off the streets, but also some of these properties, as you all stated, are struggling. So the margins are so thin that folks can't invest to, have a fresh coat of paint when it needs it, and repave the parking lot when that needs it, and remove graffiti and all the rest. And I imagine that this program would allow folks to do that, so we get a better facility in our neighborhoods, as well as pulling homeless folks off the street. You alluded to something that I don't want to get too far in the weeds on, but I wanted to see if you could talk about it in broad strokes, about the differentiation in compensation for units, and sort of what the public sector investment will be in these private pieces of property, and how we ensure that the public gets value out of that. And so if we spend, one, is there a limit on how much we're going to spend on rehabbing? And if so, how do we make sure the public actually captures that value and it doesn't just go over to the landowner after 3 years?
Meg Barkley again. I think the thing that's great about this is actually the landlords themselves will be investing in the improvements based on basically this increased rental stream that they're going to see on the units. They'll be able to privately finance the improvements, which is how, if we put public money into the rehab, we would put a covenant on the property to be used for PSH for, the money that we have comes with the 55-year covenant. This way, they finance the rehab, but it's also less intense than what would be required by public rehabilitation money. Mm-hmm. They finance it, they can pay it off. So we're actually getting private sector investment in improving these properties, and the rental stream is what's sort of on the long-term kind of underwriting that.
Excellent.
And to add to Meg's comment, Capri Maddox here from the City Attorney's Office, to add, you should know that the Apartment Owners Association of Greater Los Angeles has already secured several banks that are interested in providing low-interest loans to members that are interested in this program.
Excellent.
It's a win-win.
Thank you so much. Members, so we have a couple, Mr. Bonin.
Thanks. Sorry, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make one comment and suggestion, sort of sticking with my theme of going outside of our usual circles on stuff. I have a motel in my district that got converted back when Mr. Rosendahl was in office. It's on the border of Mar Vista and Culver City. Mr. Harris Dawson's been there with me. It's run by Upward Bound House. And when they converted, they got different designers to do each unit, and folks donated. Now, I think it was the board members of Upward Bound House who identified all these folks, but it really makes those units home. They don't feel like a facility, they feel like a home. I'd like to give some thought, I don't expect an answer right now, but how we can get the private sector engaged. Okay. Maybe the chamber can help us on this, or associations of designers in Los Angeles, where we get some folks to come in to volunteer to redesign the rooms, decorate them, and provide some materials, and it can drive some of our costs down.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Bonentil. So I want to continue this item for 30 days or less and ask you all to come back to this committee with a report back on the amendment from CD7 that the project applications require submission of a property management plan. And also I want to submit an instruction to HSID with the assistance of the CLA and the CAO to report back in 30 days or sooner on how the City Council can establish an appropriate method to ensure equitable geographic distribution throughout all areas of Los Angeles of these motel conversions. So if folks come back to us with an answer on that, because right now, as I understand it, it's really left up to the owners to decide, and we want to see if we can be more purposeful than that. You all will come back to us in 30 days or less. You don't have to wait for 30 days.
Okay.
But also with the understanding as well that it is limited to where the hotels are currently located.
Exactly, right. We're not going to make new motels for this.
Yeah, okay.
Right, I got you. So that'll be the order without objection.
So can I, just to clarify Councilmember Rodriguez's motion on the property management plan, just so we could relate to HSID, what exactly?
Actually, I'm just getting clarification right now. So my understanding is that some of what we were concerned with in terms of the case management will most likely cover some of what I was hoping to seek in making that amendment. So I think we might actually have it's already satisfied. So I think we're okay.
So you
we
want
can
to
go ahead and withdraw that.
Withdraw that? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so we only have one. Geographic equity.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think that brings us to item number 4.
Yes. Item number 4 is a mitigated negative declaration addendum to the Southern California Association of Governments 2016 through 2040 Regional Transportation Plan, Sustainable Community Strategy, Final Program Environmental Impact Report, and related California Environmental Quality Act findings, report from the Los Angeles City Planning Commission, and proposed ordinance relative to amending sections 12.03, 12.04, 0.09, 14.00, and 16.05 of the Los Angeles Municipal Code to establish regulations to facilitate the production of permanent supportive housing. This matter is also referred to the Planning and Land Use Management Committee.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We have a healthy stack of public comment cards on this matter, so I'll call folks up, and hopefully you can get your questions in so that when staff comes up, they can respond to them. Should you have any, we have Ann Sewell from the California Community Foundation, Valerie Acevedo from the Southern California Association of Nonprofit Housing, Dora Gallo from a Community of Friends.
Good afternoon, council members, Councilmember Harris-Dawson. 2 years ago, when a coalition of service providers, permanent supportive housing developers, foundations, and the attorneys that love them got together to talk about moving from 300 to 1,000 permanent supportive housing units in the city of LA, which eventually became, through your leadership, HHH. The thing that they talked about was not just money. They talked about how in some of the smaller cities of the county, they could permit and entitle a permanent supportive housing building in 6 months. And in the city of LA, it takes 2.5 years. With the savings that the proposed ordinance before you would bring in terms of the time of holding this, projects would on average save $330,000 just in taxes, holding costs, insurance. With the with the parking savings that are proposed, we'd save $10 million a year in parking that is unused currently. So we're very happy that this is before you. We ask you to approve it. Thank you so much for your leadership.
Thank you.
Apologies for the hiccup earlier. My name is Valerie, and I'm here representing the Southern California Association of Nonprofit Housing. We are a coalition of over 250 nonprofit housing developers and supporters in the region, some of which who are here. SCAMP supports LA's permanent supportive housing ordinance because it will help increase siting and help streamline new PSH developments. We understand there have been many obstacles to construction, such as CEQA and community opposition. Fortunately, the ordinance cuts red tape while still respecting neighborhood character and saves taxpayers millions of dollars. It's critical we deliver on the promises of HHH and vote yes on this ordinance. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dora Gallo. I'm the CEO for Community Friends. We are a developer and operator of permanent supportive housing since 1988. And while our 48 buildings in our portfolio are located throughout Los Angeles and Orange County, the bulk of our portfolio, 35 buildings housing over 2,500 people, including 600 children, are in the city of Los Angeles. I'm here to support the Planning Department's proposed permanent supportive housing ordinance. As a developer and operator of supportive housing, we know firsthand both the joys and the challenges of doing this type of work. We believe the proposed ordinance will encourage production of more homes for families and individuals experiencing homelessness at a quicker pace and at lower cost, as Ann had indicated. This ordinance will streamline the development process, which is critical to the city's ability to deliver on the promise of Proposition HHH. I join my colleagues who are here today to urge you in supporting this ordinance, and I thank you for your leadership in maintaining your focus on ending homelessness in Los Angeles. Thank you.
Thank you. Olivia Lee, Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce. Armando Flores from Valley Industry and Commerce Association. Becky Dennison from Venice Community Housing.
Thank you. Olivia Lee with the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce. We're here in support of the Permanent Supportive Housing Ordinance. The Chamber strongly supported Measure HHH, and we want to ensure that these dollars are utilized as soon as effectively as possible. This ordinance creates a streamlined planning process that removes unnecessary barriers and red tape to create homes for our homeless community by significantly reducing the average time it takes a PSH developer to begin construction. In addition, there are strict design standards in place to ensure projects respect the character of the neighborhood is in and is required to follow existing zoning requirements. This ordinance will also save taxpayers up to $1 million on each project by adjusting our planning regulations to meet the special needs of PSH units and by requiring fewer parking spots for its residents while still providing parking for staff and visitors. For these reasons, we urge you to support the Permanent Supportive Housing Ordinance today. Thank you.
Hello, Armando Flores with the Valley Industry and Commerce Association, VICA. In 2016, VICA, along with other business organizations, strongly supported Measure HHH. And as you have heard today, it is time to deliver on the promise of HHH and ensure those dollars are properly utilized. This ordinance will help produce much-needed homes for thousands of individuals across Los Angeles by streamlining the planning process and removing unnecessary barriers. It respects neighborhood character with stringent design standards to ensure projects fit in with the community and will only allow apartments to be built in areas where apartment buildings are currently allowed. PSH has helped many formerly and chronically homeless individuals. However, there are currently not enough units being built to keep up with the demand. Cost studies in 6 different states and cities found that supportive housing results in direct public system savings due to the reduction of tenant use of expensive homeless shelters, hospitals, emergency rooms, jails, and prisons. Supportive housing benefits communities by improving the safety of neighborhoods, beautifying city blocks with new and rehabilitated properties, and increasing or stabilizing property values over time. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Dennison.
Hi, I'm Becky Dennison with Venice Community Housing. We're also here in strong support of the ordinance and urge you to move it forward quickly. I do just want to make a couple of points. One is I really urge you to not consider the 2 city-owned properties in Venice as part of your considerations of this ordinance today and moving forward. There'll be other votes. Neither of those properties either qualify for this ordinance or are using the ordinance. Our colleagues at Tom Safran Associates are not using it. So there's been a lot of concern around those 2 sites. They're not relevant to this discussion. What is relevant to the discussion is all of the other sites that are possible, both in Venice, throughout the west side, and throughout our city, that have to move faster and they have to move cheaper. I also want to say that the parking, reducing the parking requirement is really, really critical to the success of the ordinance. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of space that could be units. It's really just unused space within these buildings that could be better used. And I think the Planning Commission said it perfectly. We need to worry about housing people, not cars. So I urge you to keep the parking reduction in. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jason Miles, Venice Community Housing. ZT Aquarian, Venice Community Housing. Daniel Hong, LA Family Housing. Yes, sir. Pink shirt, let's do it. Chartreuse.
Okay, I am Zarathustra Aquarian. I have been a resident in permanent supportive housing since 2004. I served in the Army before becoming homeless in the 80s and the 90s. My search and achieving Section 8 took 8 years before I received an apartment at Venice Community Housing. During my time there, I've received support that saved my life. Venice Community Housing has supported me to overcome addiction, depression, and traumatic brain injury and PTSD. I was lifted up from my homeless mentality to a mentality of safety and wellness because of the personalized care, support, and respect and love I've received from the staff at Venice Community Housing. I am now able to have a safe place to read, to do my art, and work on my computer. I have a place to call home. Please support the production of permanent supportive housing ordinance so that everyone who's experienced what I have has the same chance.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name is Jason Miles, and I'm attending in permanent supportive housing. 4 years before I received keys to my home, I began an intensive search for housing. I searched and waited for housing 4 years while working to maintain relationships, my health, my employment, my sanity, while suffering the emotional toll of depression, worry, anxiety, and ridicule. I endured all of this without a home. The permanent supportive housing ordinance would have made it possible for me and others like me to gain permanent housing 1.5 years sooner. Please pass the permanent supportive housing ordinance so others can come home sooner.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you, too, for providing testimony. Hi, council members. My name is Daniel Quinn. I'm Vice President of Real Estate at LA Family Housing. We are the largest homeless service provider and real estate developer in the San Fernando Valley, and we strongly support the permanent supportive housing ordinance. As a matter of fact, we hosted one of the information sessions that the planning department held throughout the city. And the remarks that we hear is that our developments are of good design, that they're way underparked, and those are two of the comments that we hear. So we, in generally support the permanent supportive housing ordinance because it helps to shorten the real estate development timeline. It helps to save taxpayer dollars, upwards of $1 million in savings due to hard costs, construction costs, as well as holding costs and consultant fees. We also support this progressive and sensible ordinance. Thank you.
I have Mr. Mike Alvidres, Skid Row Housing Trust, Mr. Jerry Jones, the Provider Alliance, and Mr. Tommy Newman.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm here to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance. We at Skid Row Housing Trust are a permanent supportive housing developer and have been for a number of years. We have been talking about the crisis of homelessness in this city for so long that the significance of crisis begins to lose its importance. We still are in a crisis. We expect to be in a crisis until we can get these new units online. We are definitely in support of the ordinance to speed up the process and lower costs. I also want to raise the issue, I was just counting up, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 projects that we've completed over the last 10 years for chronically homeless folks with parking requirements that often result in empty parking spaces. Again, Triple H targets chronically homeless, which by definition means folks with pretty severe disabilities. So don't change the parking requirements as it stands in the proposed ordinance, and we fully support it and hope you'll move it to City Council right away. Thank you.
Thank you. I am Jerry Jones. With the Intercity Law Center, I'm also representing the Provider Alliance to End Homelessness. It's a coalition of 57 organizations on the front lines, service providers, housing developers. So each of you have a letter that we've submitted to the council. I'll just summarize the second sentence, strongly endorsing the core elements of this draft, which includes city approval should be based on objective criteria and determined by a ministerial process. Site requirements should allow for appropriate unit sizes, lower parking minimums, and adequate space for social services. And finally, that developer incentive should be provided to reduce the per unit costs of construction. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tommy Newman, United Way. Thank you so much, council members, for all your hard work on this. A few points. We talk a lot about the cost of PSH. The ordinance represents millions of dollars in savings that will stretch those Triple H dollars further. Zeroing in on parking, parking will still be required in these buildings. There will still be staff requirements for parking. There will still be parking requirements for affordable restricted units. So we're not taking the whole building to zero, but we are appropriately reducing the parking requirements for the target population. There's also nothing stopping a developer from adding additional parking if it makes sense for that building in that location. So we're setting a baseline and able to build from there as opposed to mandating something that then wastes millions of Triple H dollars. And finally, the ordinance only applies to high-quality transit corridors. So we are reinforcing the fact that we're reducing parking in a place where it makes sense to reduce parking because if you are able to get out and about and use Metro, it'll be right there. So thank you so much for moving this quickly forward.
Thank you so much. Bridget Kelly, PATH, Marie Ramsey, the Central City Association, Antonio Hicks, Public Counsel.
Good afternoon. My name is Bridget Kelly, and I work at PATH, a housing and homeless services organization dedicated to ending homelessness for individuals, families, and communities. With our roots right here in LA, our programs are committed to helping the most vulnerable individuals living on our streets. The Permanent Supportive Housing Ordinance is critical to delivering on the promises of Prop HHH and our city's ability to build 1,000 units per year. The PSH ordinance would cut red tape to allow for faster and more efficient creation of much-needed permanent supportive housing. I'm here to voice support for the ordinance that will allow for more of our neighbors experiencing homelessness to move into their forever homes. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. My name is Antonio Hicks, and I'm an attorney with Public Counsel. We work with affordable housing developers, community-based organizations, and individual Angelenos who are facing evictions, displacement, and homelessness. The need for permanent supportive housing is well documented. We at Public Counsel support streamlining the development of supportive housing as a necessary and meaningful response to the homelessness crisis in our city. The Permanent Supporting Housing Ordinance will facilitate the rapid and responsible development of PSH. It will also help us meet the goals set out by HHH. Streamlining makes financial sense, it makes sense as responsible planning, and ultimately it will help some of our most vulnerable residents get into housing much sooner. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Marie Ramsey, and I'm here on behalf of CCA. We strongly support the Permanent Supportive Housing Ordinance and ask that you adopt it as presented. This ordinance is a great example of a production-based approach to creating housing for those most in need. In order for this ordinance to fully work, it is critical to maintain no parking requirements for the housing units. It's also important to remember that this housing will be located in areas rich with transit. Resident parking and supportive housing is consistently underutilized and is a waste of resources. Thank you for your consideration, and thank you to City Planning for their work on this.
Thank you so much. Dara Papel, Eric Ades, LA Community Action, and Emily, you will have to help me with your last name, of the United Way. Martinette? Martinique. Oh, Martinique, like the island. Okay, perfect, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Dara Papel with CSH, Corporation for Supportive Housing. We're a national nonprofit partnering with communities to end homelessness through the creation of permanent supportive housing. We know the lack of affordable housing is the biggest cause of homelessness in Los Angeles. In fact, while our partners in LA housed more homeless people than ever before in 2016, the number of Angelenos experiencing chronic homelessness increased for one reason. A growing number of Angelenos were unable to afford an apartment on their income and access the support that they needed to obtain and stabilize in healthy housing. The supportive housing ordinance will allow some of the most vulnerable Angelenos to access an affordable and safe place to call their home, and will single-handedly create a pathway to deliver out on our commitment to build 1,000 supportive housing units each year through Prop HHH. For these reasons, we strongly support this ordinance, and your action today will help to move our neighbors out of homelessness and is an opportunity to address the needs of each of your constituents, housed or otherwise.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Eric Ades, and I'm with the Los Angeles Community Action Network. LA County is here in strong support for the Permanent Supportive Housing Ordinance. The PSH Ordinance is critical to delivering on the promises of HHH, as you've heard, and in meeting its rightly ambitious goals. As many of you know, for decades we struggle with the resources to end homelessness, and now that we have the funds, what we need is to get these units sited and built as soon as possible. This ordinance represents a balanced approach to streamlining the process of building homes for homeless residents while respecting neighborhood character and also saving millions in taxpayer dollars. The historic passage of HHH would likely have not been possible without members of this committee. And we call on you to continue your commitment to HHH and to ending homelessness by moving forward the PSH ordinance as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Emily Martinick. I'm a Corporation for Supportive Housing Speak Up advocate. This past Saturday, I was privileged to attend the Empowerment Congress on the gubernatorial debates. The number one issue in the state of California is homelessness. The entire state of California is looking to Los Angeles to see how we are going to resolve the problem that we have decided to take on. The entire state is looking at us. As a supportive housing recipient, I can truly say that we do not need all the parking. The parking spaces of my place are empty. We could use a couple more apartments, maybe some more area for some more creative things for the residents to take care of. As an advocate, I encourage you to please support this so that we can expedite the process of supportive housing and getting the people off the street. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have Allison Schellert.
Just be myself. My name is Allison Schellert, and I represent just a group of women and men in Hancock Park, not part of the Greater Wilshire Neighborhood Association, just a bunch of people who support permanent supportive housing. We are actively engaged in educating our community what permanent supportive housing, hoping that neighborhoods will get out of the way and allow this great solution to move forward. I hope that you guys will do everything you can to move this forward quickly. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you so much. We have staff from city planning and other departments to report on this matter.
Good afternoon again. Callie Hardy with the Department of City Planning. Again, if it's all right, I have about a 5 to 7 minute presentation going over some of the details of the proposed ordinance. The proposed permanent supportive housing ordinance would help us to facilitate the production of permanent supportive housing throughout the whole entire city, and is kind of, again, being kind of following on the heels of the comprehensive homeless strategy, which has set a very ambitious path forward for the city to expand our provision of permanent supportive housing throughout the city and help really find a solution to homelessness. And to meet our current need for permanent supportive housing, the comprehensive homeless strategy identified a need or a goal of creating at least 1,000 units of permanent supportive housing per year for the next 10 years. Just as a frame of reference, over the past few years, we've been really hitting more around like 300 units per year. So the proposed ordinance is intended to help us meet that goal by recognizing some of the unique characteristics of permanent supportive housing, streamlining the planning entitlement process, standardizing our requirements for permanent supportive housing, and ensuring that the projects have quality design as well as resident amenities. The proposed ordinance would also build on existing state law, which requires that permanent supportive housing is considered the same or treated the same as all multifamily residential uses, and also state law that says that density bonus incentives must be provided for projects that provide a certain percentage of affordable units. In the process of developing the draft ordinance, the Department of City Planning conducted nearly a dozen site visits, researched prior projects that had been built throughout the city, consulted with permanent supportive housing experts, assembled a working group of people who are very familiar with this topic, and tried to really understand what some of the common barriers are that are facing permanent supportive housing projects today, as well as some of the things that do make them unique. We found that many of the projects have had the need to seek a discretionary planning entitlement because our existing zoning code regulations do not recognize the ways that these projects are unique. For instance, many permanent supportive housing projects house single individuals, and so you'll see a high percentage of projects with smaller studio units compared to your typical multifamily, even affordable housing building. So these projects are likely to reach their density limit before they're maximizing their building envelope, thereby failing to maximize the number of supportive housing units that could feasibly be developed on a site. Other projects, hoping to avoid discretionary review, we found have downsized their projects to fall under the 50-unit threshold for site plan review, which is, an additional discretionary review process with the planning department. Additionally, while PSH projects can request certain parking reductions today, we found that a large amount of the parking spaces that are being provided are going completely unutilized. And again, that's largely because most of the residents of permanent supportive housing do not own vehicles. And we also saw that supportive services are a very integral component of permanent supportive housing projects. And so you'll tend to see projects providing a larger amount of common sort of open space or supportive services space on site to accommodate that, which could sometimes require a zoning adjustment or maybe, lead to a trade-off being made between providing additional units. So for the proposed ordinance to be eligible, a permanent supportive housing project would be required to adhere to a set of standardized requirements that would be that are intended to align with the funding requirements through the Measure HHH Permanent Supportive Housing Loan Program. So first of all, 100% of the units in the building would be required to be restricted as affordable for a period of 55 years. Additionally, at least 50% of the units in the project must be permanent supportive housing units restricted to a target population, which would be defined as persons with lower incomes who have one or more disabilities and are homeless or are chronically homeless. Projects would also be required to demonstrate that they have a supportive services contract in place. And they would also be required to be located in a zone that allows for multifamily residential use, so your RD 1.5 or less restrictive residential zones in the city. Project siting would also be subject to a location requirement that would mandate that the PSH is located in a transit-rich area, which is defined as a high-quality transit area under our regional transportation plan. So projects that meet all of those eligibility requirements would be granted some limited exceptions from applicable zoning code regulations, and the intent of that is to recognize the ways that these projects are unique. Any other sort of applicable regulations would apply with the exception of the exceptions I will describe. So first, given the smaller average size of the units that I described, the number of allowable dwelling units would not be subject to a maximum residential density limit, with the exception of projects that are located in the RD 1.5, so a restricted density zone, where that density increase would be restricted to 500 square feet of lot area per dwelling unit. We would also be modifying the parking standards, so that the requirement would be 0 parking required for those PSH units or units restricted to the target population. We would also include a new parking standard of 1 per every 20 units to accommodate the supportive services staff or other guests that may be coming on site, and that's a new requirement that we don't currently have in our regulations today. And then for the other affordable units in the project, we're aligning with the state AB 744 standards and requiring a half space per unit if they're near a major transit stop. And as I've also discussed, we are typically seeing, single individuals living in smaller units, and the average household size is approximately 1/3 of that of a typical multifamily unit. And so for that reason, kind of thinking about the way that our intensity of use and the number of people on site is going to be scaling, as well as the size of the building, we've proposed amending the site plan review threshold to one that's more sensitive to the use as well as context, physical context. So we would, the ordinance proposes to amend it to 120 units throughout the city, and then 200 units for projects that are located downtown or in a planned regional center. And also in recognition that the supportive services are such an essential component, any of those areas that are being used for that purpose would be excluded from your total allowable floor area calculation under this ordinance. And then lastly, the ordinance would allow projects to be eligible for up to 5 concessions or incentives, basically selected from a menu that would provide modifications from development standards, things such as yard setbacks, an increase in the floor area ratio, an increase in the height limit. And built in with that incentive, we've included a transitional height requirement, as well as sort of limitations on that setback incentive in residential zones, with the idea of respecting that front yard kind of common line in your existing residential neighborhoods. The ordinance also includes a set of performance standards that are intended to ensure that we truly are getting high-quality projects that are serving the residents' needs, as well as fitting in well within the neighborhoods that they're going to be going in. So we've included a series of ministerial standards that would regulate, as I discussed, the project location, the number and amount of resident amenities that are provided on site, the supportive services, the physical space for that supportive services area, as well as design standards and construction standards. There's also 2 important additional provisions that the ordinance includes. One is trying to be consistent with the city's existing policies regarding the use of city-owned land for permanent supportive housing. The ordinance includes an amendment to the public facilities zone to amend the process by which a residential use could be allowed in that zone. So the idea is that given that permanent supportive housing provides such a substantial public benefit, the proposed amendment would allow these projects to use the use and development standards of the least restrictive adjacent zone, provided that they are a joint public-private development and they're meeting all of the standards of the ordinance. And then lastly, to allow for residential hotel properties that are located largely in manufacturing zones to be converted or replaced with permanent supportive housing. The ordinance allows for the conversion of these properties to permanent supportive housing in any zone. So just to wrap up very quickly, so qualified projects that are meeting all these requirements, they would get all of these benefits, and they would come through a streamlined administrative clearance process with the Department of City Planning. And there's also additionally, as part of that process, a public noticing requirement, just kind of, notifying adjacent property owners and posting notice on the site of the application. And with that, that's all I have. I'm happy to answer questions.
Yes. Mr. Bonin? Nothing? Mr. Huizar?
Thank you, and it's great to see that we're implementing another portion of our comprehensive strategic plan, and a lot of moving pieces in there, particularly the land use area is one that's going to help quite a bit as it relates to providing more housing. Here in particular, I like the fact that for city-owned parcels, it's some added expediency which we can do because, as we've said, we want to provide public parcels, city-owned parcels to put them up for permanent supportive housing. In Boyle Heights, we have 2 parcels that we put out. There's also, we got creative in a triangle that exists with just empty land and some 2 streets on the side that we're going to vacate and give over to Homelessness, Inc., which will provide permanent supportive housing for young people. And we've gotten creative in that way. And although Boyle Heights has received more than its fair share of homeless housing, we're still moving forward with these public parcels. But one of the concerns I had when we put it out there was it's difficult enough for somebody to move a project forward. And now with a public parcel, there's oftentimes a lot of other added barriers, right? Because it's a public property, we have to offer it up first to, there's a state code on who we offer it up, all that other stuff. So is that those other barriers looked at as well in the sale and RFP in the property part of this as well, or is this just a development side of it once it's been decided that we're going to give it over to a permanent housing developer?
Yeah, Matt Gillespie, City Planning. Fortunately, I don't think we can amend the state requirements on the noticing and first right of refusal. I believe this affects our ability, the zoning for the site. City-owned parcels are usually zoned PF, public facilities, which do not allow residential by right. There's a process where you can build a public-private partnership, do some housing on those sites, but you have to take the most restrictive zone next door to you or adjacent to the site. We are amending that to take the least restrictive zone from the adjacent site. So that actually opens up quite a few sites that would not have been able to build multifamily housing without that to be able to. And we feel it's appropriate because they're still next door to a site that allows multifamily development.
Yeah. The sites in Boyle Heights, 2 of them are by commercial corridors, which they're former parking lots. Well, they are parking lots currently. I would imagine that replacement parking would be important as well. So although we're reducing parking as required for the permanent supportive housing, I could foresee an area that has an active commercial corridor that they would like some type of replacement housing. But that's just part of the design, right? It's not going to impede anything like that. I mean, it's not prohibiting us building parking for the adjacent commercial corridor, correct? Like public parking, not so much for the site itself, but public parking.
That's correct, Matt Gillespie. Yeah, I mean, certainly with a public-private partnership, the city would be involved in what do we want for that site. If there was city parking there, we want to replace it. I'm sure that can be built in through the city approvals. If there's any commercial development on the project, that would have to continue to provide parking for any retail restaurants and things like that. This is just reducing parking just for units reserved for the homeless individuals, the target population.
The current requirements we have for housing under our zoning rules, those are being, but we could always do it's not impeding the other type of parking. That's right. Thank you.
Actually, just on, before I go to my colleagues, just on parking to follow up on Mr. Weezar's comment, is there a rule, and this may be a housing question, is there a rule in the covenant to properties that have empty parking spaces from renting those parking spaces out to the neighborhoods? Okay, we'll come back to that. Mr. Price?
Probably not easy.
I don't know.
If it's in the land use restrictions, you cannot rent them out. We have to keep it for the project. If you change the covenants,
To allow for that, so those parking spaces just sit empty, and even if they're needed for other buildings in the neighborhood, you can't use them? Okay. Mr. Rodriguez.
No, but you actually bring up a really good point, because we have a lot of, where we're constructing a lot of permanent supportive housing in my district, there is that chronic need for parking in the area, and we don't have access to a lot of public transportation. So I think it's part of the ongoing struggle and conversation that we have as it relates to land use. And I think to Mr. Weezar's point, it's, and familiarity with some of the spaces in Boyle Heights that you're dealing with. I want to make sure that again, this would not supersede our ability to continue to provide those public lots. So that this would not in any way inhibit our ability to make sure that if we were in fact to identify a public lot for that in a public-private partnership, that this would not supersede or prohibit our ability to make sure that we could continue to provide those spaces in a community. Correct?
That's my understanding. I'm not an expert in I don't know if Meg is still here, but my understanding is that if it's a public-private partnership on a city-owned piece of land, the city has complete authority to require whatever we want on that piece of property as part of the RFP. Yeah.
Okay. I did circulate an amendment, so
You should probably say it.
Sure. Yeah. So I did circulate an amendment, and it's also based on my experience of having working on two permanent supportive housing projects in my district at this time. And so what I'd like to include is additional performance standards, which I think are going to be very important to helping to maintain kind of the elements in a neighborhood. When we talk about some of the characteristics of what these projects are, I think it's really important to include some of the things that I've provided to the committee, and wanted to assure that there's no delay. There's obviously a very heightened need for us to continue to make progress in this area and to accelerate the construction of these permanent supportive housing units. And so in the spirit of that, I wanted to ask the city attorney and planning if they could modify the language with what I've provided, and see if we could have this back ready for committee or for Plum.
Deputy City Attorney Amy Brothers, I just wanted to clarify. I think I have what you would like to circulate, and I read it as instruct planning and city attorney to report back within 30 days or fewer on possible technical corrections to incorporate the design features that you've circulated here. I just wanted to double check that it's an instruction to report back.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. Please compliment your staff on elegant writing about buildings. These makes it sound like places I want to go.
We've been busy working on these projects.
I also have let me make sure I don't have any questions. I actually do have one question. So what we're putting forward today, assuming that we incorporate some of these, incorporate the design elements that Councilmember Rodriguez put forward, how does this square these projects with JJJ? Or does it have no effect at all?
Deputy City Attorney Amy Brothers, JJJ is applicable to legislative approvals when somebody's seeking a zone change or a general plan amendment. Then they're also required to offer affordable housing and certain labor standards. Here, these projects in and of themselves don't anticipate a zone change or a general plan amendment. That would be a separate and additional process.
And even as it relates to transit-oriented development and transit density bonuses?
I can move. Matt Glessney, Planning. I believe you're talking about the TOC, the Transit-Oriented Communities Program that came out of Measure JJJ. It's an incentive-based program. That's an option available to developers of supportive housing if they feel there's better incentives because they're right near a transit stop that may give them what they need. So that's an option available. They have either option. They can't combine the two. They can't do both. They can't combine. You get kind of two bonuses on top of each other, a bit of a double dip. But we did try to basically build in the same or actually better kind of incentives into this ordinance with the idea that the PSH ordinance is going to provide most of the incentives, same type of incentives, if not greater, than would be allowed for the TOC.
So if a builder goes for the density bonus near a train stop, they can't also get the relaxed parking requirement.
That is true. They would. The parking and the TOC is not. Well, no. Let me. I'm forgetting that we actually in the TOC program we do have a zero parking requirement for affordable housing, 100% affordable housing projects near transit. So that's actually already built in. There's actually already an ability to get that.
Good. Okay. Thank you for that. I would also like to put forward a instruction and ask you all to report back to us in 30 days or less, with emphasis on less, to the Housing Department with the assistance of the CLA and CAO to report back in 30 days or sooner on how City Council can establish an appropriate method to ensure equitable geographic distribution of permanent supportive housing units throughout the city of Los Angeles. And assuming those two amendments are friendly, we will continue this matter for 30 days or less without objection. Hearing none, that'll be the order. Thank you all so much. We'll see you very, very soon. We have one public comment card. Caitlin McCarthy.
Well, I'm disappointed that he's back. Great, sounds good. We need to decentralize Skid Row. A centralized Skid Row creates an ecosystem that preys on the most vulnerable and feeds the underbelly of the city.
Thank you. So we just made two motions to that effect, so.
I watched the whole meeting. I wanted to put that into the record.
I appreciate it. If there's no further business, yes, sir.
If I could add to that, in our comprehensive strategic plan, a tenet of that strategic plan is to decentralize services from those areas that have historically received these types of services. So we are attempting to allow for the placement of new services in areas that have historically not received them and just decentralize them from areas that have historically received them and no longer use what was then the containment policy, which the policy of the city was to put everything in Skid Row. So we're attempting to reverse that, and it's going to be years of getting where we want to get. That's the reality, I think. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Weezer, and thank you for your comment. I did want to, the two motions I put forward on motels and on permanent supportive housing are designed to get at just that question, so we don't have over-concentration, not just in Skid Row, but in other parts of the city where sometimes this type of development can concentrate, and you create a situation where you've contained people in a very specific area. And so we think there's the will to move away from that, and we want to codify that in our motel ordinance and our permanent supportive housing, and it's also in our strategic plan that we passed last year. So thank you for that. If there's no further business, we're adjourned, sir?
No, sir. That clears the desk.
Excellent. We're adjourned. Thank you all so much.